Alrighty, YouTube Niner Empire, what is going down? Welcome back to another video. So I'm seeing clips on Twitter regarding Steve Wilks' decision to move from the booth to the sideline. And Steve Wilks goes on a press conference and basically says he believes that everybody's making it more of a bigger deal than what it needs to be, which can be true. I definitely think there was a lot of chatter, of course, about Steve Wilks potentially moving from the booth to the sideline, and I made a video about this, going into the bye week about how him and Kyle Shanahan were going to have that conversation privately, and talk about him potentially moving from the booth to the sideline. And he's probably right. I definitely think, in a way, people are kind of making it seem more serious than I think what it really needs to be. Look, at the end of the day, my opinion on that doesn't change. I don't think it's really going to matter that much in terms of like the 49ers defense playing better or not, because at the end of the day, it's about the scheming of things. And if he's going to continue to play in man coverage, I don't care if he's on the field. I don't care if he's outside of the stadium. I don't care if he's up in the booth. Nothing's going to change. The only way you change the 49ers defense going forward is if you go back to the roots and start playing more zone coverage. Make it to where you're giving the defensive line more opportunities to rush the passer and to create sacks. And I think that's what they'll do, to be completely honest. I know for a fact Kyle Shanahan is not going to let this defense continue to play like they have been playing over the course of, the last 3 weeks or so. But either way, Steve Wilks in his interview said that he wants to be able to communicate with the guys a little bit more during the game. Certain things that I'm seeing, I want to be able to communicate with them directly. And of course, Kyle Shanahan yesterday said in his press conference that, he believes that it's better for Steve Wilks to be on the field because he can communicate with the guys directly. Obviously this 49ers defense is used to seeing their defensive coordinator on the field. Kyle Shanahan even touched on that as well and talked about how some of the, it helps more so the linebackers in terms of with communication and things of that nature. But he also touched on like how 49ers players are, defensive players I'm talking about, are used to seeing their defensive coordinator and are used to having their defensive coordinator on the sidelines. But Steve Wilks is probably right, though. I'm not going to say that this thing is not being blown out of proportion, because I definitely think, in a way, there's been a lot of media talk about Steve Wilks, calling plays from the 49ers sideline instead. And it seems like there's been more storylines written about that than what there probably should have been. But at the beginning of the press conference, he said, guys, to me, just very candid, we're making a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be. I want to communicate more with guys during the game, and would rather talk with them directly. So, look, he also went on to say, I can honestly say I'm sort of built for this, not in an arrogant way. Standard is high here, so we've lost 3 in a row and feels like the ceiling's collapsed. I can take it. I'm the new guy here. I have confidence in myself. I have confidence in the players and in the coaches. So, look, I definitely think that Kyle Shanahan talked about it. Kyle Shanahan even mentioned that if it was up to him in terms of him being on the sideline or up in the booth, he would be up in the booth, because he thinks when you're up in the booth with a desk and a chair, you can write more things down. Kyle Shanahan prefers sitting up in the booth. Of course, Kyle Shanahan being the head coach, he's not going to do that. He's going to be on the sideline. But if you guys can remember, going back to 2016 and previously, when he was the offensive coordinator, there were a lot of times, and I know in Cleveland, there were a lot of games, maybe the entire season when he was in Cleveland, where he was on the sidelines. Now, going back to 2016 season with the Atlanta Falcons, when Kyle was there, he was up in the booth. He was up in the booth during the Super Bowl as well in 2016 for the Falcons and the Patriots. So Kyle believes he's better off in the booth. He also mentioned that there's pros and cons to both, and ultimately it comes down to what that coach prefers. And again, I don't think Kyle Shanahan, a lot of people I think too are kind of making it out to seem like Kyle Shanahan ripped Steve Wilks and was like, you have to be on the sideline. I don't think it was like that at all. I think Kyle Shanahan probably brought it up. Steve Wilks probably was like, you know what? Let's try it out and see if that helps a little better. I don't think there's any type of turmoil going on between the coaching staff whatsoever. I don't think Steve Wilks' job is in jeopardy whatsoever. I think Steve Wilks can turn it around. I'm going to have to see that, but I definitely think, he clearly is a great coach. That's why a lot of the Carolina Panthers players last year vouched for him to be their next head coach, but ultimately they chose to go with Frank Reich. But no, all in all, I think that at the end of the day, him being on the sideline, yeah, the communication may be better, but it's not going to help the 49ers defense drastically. The Niners defense isn't going to come out against Jacksonville. They could, but they're not going to come. I don't think they're going to come out against Jacksonville and hold Jacksonville to 3 points. At the end of the day, it's all about scheming, coverages, play calling, and things of that nature. And if you're, like I said, at the beginning of this video, if Steve Wilks is going to continue to play in man coverage, the 49ers defensive struggles will continue. And I'm not saying don't ever play in man coverage. I'm just saying pump the brakes on playing in man coverage as much as we have been. And I know Steve Wilks has made adjustments. I know this 49ers defense is probably going to come out looking a little different in terms of, packages and coverages. Then, it's going to be different, that's for sure. And there's going to be tweaks, but all in all, it's going to be the same base defense. Nothing's going to change with that. But again, and I talked about this yesterday, but I definitely think with Steve Wilks, being on the sideline, there will be, a sense of better communication with the players and him. And, again, I think there's pros and cons to being up in the booth. I know there's pros and cons to being on the sideline. But ultimately, I'm more of a fan. If I'm going to be a defensive coordinator, and I've already said this, but if I'm a defensive coordinator, and I know it's kind of easy for me to say this now, but knowing, especially for the Niners, knowing how this defense is and how it's been coached the past couple of years, they're so used to having their defensive coordinator on the sidelines. There's, of course, better communication. Again, it's not going to help with the play because at the end of the day, it's scheming, play calling, and the players just doing their jobs all in all. But I would probably be more of a fan of being on the field during the games than up in the press box in the booth. But again, I can say that all I want. I'm not a coach, so obviously, I can see why there's probably pros and cons to going into both, whether that's being on the booth or being up in the booth or on the field. But at the end of the day, Steve Wilks is right. I definitely think it's probably being a little blown out of proportion, or maybe a little. There's kind of too much media coverage on it as is. But at the end of the day, the 49ers defense ranks 1 in the entire NFL. The defense ranks number 15. So clearly I think in terms of and I talked about this a couple weeks ago as well, as far as people saying that Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers team is scapegoating Steve Wilks, I don't think that's the case because at the end of the day, the offense has seemingly been better than the defense has been over the course of, this first half of the season. And then obviously, the 49ers offense being ranked in the top 3, David Lombardi says it's at number 1. Now, I don't know what he means by that. I don't know if he means in terms of points. I think it is points, actually. I'm looking at the tweet right now. Yeah, it looks like it is points. Or DVOA and efficiency. Yards don't really matter because some teams run up the scores in the fourth versus others run out. Yeah, so I don't know. But either way, you guys get the point. The 49ers offense is top 3, okay? And then when you look at the defense, they're probably in the middle of the pack in terms of like NFL defense is currently ranked right now. So clearly the blame, again, you can argue that it's more towards the defense. I'm not going to say that because I've watched these Niners games and the offense has been just as bad as the defense has been. But you can make good arguments as to why the 49ers have struggled so much. And a lot of people are pointing the finger at the defense. Again, I'm not one of those. I definitely think the defense has been underwhelming and hasn't played well. But the offense hasn't either. So collectively, you win as a team, you lose as a team. There's nobody to blame here. But again, I mean, as far as like Steve Wilks kind of clapping back at the media, you know, at the end of the day, he's one of the better defensive coaches in the league, or I guess he's probably widely regarded as one of the better defensive coaches in the league. And yeah, I mean, as far as it being blown out of proportion, though, I definitely agree with him there. I think there's a lot of people, Grant Cohn, David Lombardi is kind of even blown. There's been a lot of people that have blown it out of proportion. I know I've made videos on it as well, so I'm not really helping that case. But yeah, all in all, this Niners defense will figure it out. But as far as him, like, you know, being better on the sideline or being better up in the press box, none of that stuff really matters because at the end of the day, it's all about scheming, your play calling, and the players doing their jobs. But there will be better communication, that's for sure.